The human arrives. In the vast expanse of the galaxy, the sleek mercenary vessel Phantom's blade cut through the inky darkness of space. Its fierce commander, Zara Vex, stood on the bridge, her reptilian eyes surveying the star-speckled void. Zara was renowned throughout the star systems as a brilliant tactician and uncompromising leader. Her crew, an assortment of alien races united in their thirst for adventure and profit, respected and feared her in equal measure. The Phantom's viewscreen flickered to life, revealing a transmission from Zara's first mate, a lithe insectoid named Krax. "Commander, the new recruit has arrived, a human mercenary named Jack Ryder." Zara's brow furrowed. Humans were a relatively new addition to the galactic stage, and their reputation for unpredictability preceded them. "Bring him to the bridge," she ordered, her voice a guttural rasp. Moments later, the doors to the bridge slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a tall, muscular human male. Jack Ryder strode onto the bridge with a confident swagger, his rugged features etched with a cocky grin. He wore a battered leather jacket over his gray flight suit, a plasma pistol holstered at his hip. "Commander Vex," he said, nodding in Zora's direction. "Jack Ryder, at your service." Zora eyed the newcomer warily, her forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "I know who you are, human. Your reputation precedes you." Jack's grin widened. "All good things, I hope." "That remains to be seen," Zora replied coldly. "I run a tight ship, Ryder. I expect discipline, obedience, and results. If you can't provide those, you'll find yourself jettisoned out the airlock faster than you can say supernova." Jack met her gaze unflinchingly, his blue eyes sparkling with amusement. "I think you'll find I'm full of surprises, Commander." Zora's tail twitched irritably. This human's brazen confidence bordered on insubordination. She would need to put him in his place, and quickly. "We'll see about that," she said, rising from her command chair. "Follow me to the training deck. It's time to see what you're made of." As Jack fell into step behind her, Zora couldn't shake the feeling that this human would be trouble. But little did she know, Jack Ryder was about to turn her carefully ordered world upside down. On the training deck, Zora faced off against Jack, her body coiled with predatory grace. Around them, the crew gathered to watch, eager to see how the newcomer would fare against their formidable commander. "Let's see what you've got, human," Zora challenged, unsheathing her plasma claws with a menacing hiss. Jack grinned, settling into a combat stance. "Bring it on, Commander." They clashed in a blur of motion, Zora's claws slashing through the air as Jack dodged and weaved. Despite her superior speed and strength, Zora found herself hard-pressed to land a blow on the agile human. Jack fought with a fluid, almost dance-like style, his movements precise and economical. As the fight wore on, Zora's frustration mounted. This human was actually holding his own against her. With a roar of fury, she launched herself at him, determined to end the match with a decisive strike. But Jack was ready for her. In a move that left the watching crew gasping in astonishment, he sidestepped Zora's charge and caught her wrist, using her own momentum to send her tumbling to the mat. Before she could recover, he had her pinned, his forearm pressed against her throat. "Yield," he said, his voice low and intense. Zora stared up at him, her eyes blazing with humiliation and grudging respect. "I yield," she growled. As Jack helped her to her feet, the crew broke into scattered applause, impressed by the human's skill. Zora silenced them with a glare, her pride stinging from the defeat. "Not bad, human," she conceded, dusting herself off. "But don't let it go to your head. You've still got a lot to prove." Jack inclined his head, that infuriating grin never leaving his face. "I look forward to it, Commander." As the crew dispersed back to their duties, Zora watched Jack go, her mind churning with conflicting emotions. This human was a wild card, a variable she hadn't accounted for. She would have to keep a close eye on him, lest he upset the delicate balance of her ship. But even as she plotted to put the human in his place, A small part of her couldn't help but be intrigued by Jack Ryder. He was a challenge, a puzzle to be solved. And if there was one thing Zara Vex could never resist, it was a challenge. Proving ground. In the days following Jack's arrival, the crew of the Phantom's blade buzzed with excitement. The human had become the talk of the ship, his unconventional methods and irreverent attitude winning him both admirers and detractors among the motley assortment of aliens. For Zara, Jack's presence was a constant source of irritation. She watched with growing unease as he charmed his way into the good graces of her crew, his easy smile and quick wit earning him friends in every corner of the vessel. Even Krax, her loyal first mate, had taken a shine to the human, much to Zora's chagrin. But it wasn't just Jack's popularity that bothered her. It was the way he seemed to effortlessly excel at every task she threw his way. In the training simulations, he consistently outperformed even her most seasoned warriors, his unorthodox tactics catching them off guard time and again. In the engineering bay, he displayed a keen intellect and a knack for improvisation, suggesting modifications to the ship's systems that even the chief engineer hadn't considered. Zara found herself grudgingly impressed by the human's competence, even as she resented him for it. She was used to being the undisputed master of her domain, the one her crew looked to for guidance and leadership. But with Jack around, she felt her authority being slowly eroded, chipped away by his effortless charm and undeniable skill. Matters came to a head during a particularly grueling training exercise, a simulated boarding action against a hostile vessel. Zara had divided the crew into two teams, with herself leading one and Jack captaining the other. The objective was simple. The first team to capture the enemy bridge would be declared the victor. As the simulation began, Zara's team moved swiftly and efficiently, cutting through the holographic enemies with ruthless precision. She led from the front, her plasma claws carving a path of destruction through the virtual corridors. But as they neared the bridge, they found themselves facing an unexpected obstacle. Jack's team had somehow managed to flank them, lying in wait with a cleverly laid ambush. Caught off guard, Zora's team was quickly overwhelmed, their simulated armor overloading under the onslaught of enemy fire. As the simulation faded and the training deck lights came up, Zara found herself facing a grinning Jack, his team whooping and high-fiving behind him. "Looks like we win this round, Commander," he said, his tone infuriatingly smug. Zara felt her blood boil, her pride demanding that she put the upstart human in his place. But as she opened her mouth to deliver a scathing retort, she was interrupted by the sound of slow clapping from the observation deck above. "Impressive work, both of you," came the gravelly voice of General Korax, the grizzled old warrior who served as the crew's liaison to their mercenary employers. "Commander Vex, your team performed admirably, as always, but I must say I'm quite taken with Mr. Ryder's unconventional approach. It's not often someone manages to get the drop on you." Zara felt her face flush with embarrassment and anger, but she held her tongue. Korax was not someone to be trifled with, and his word carried a great deal of weight among the mercenary guilds. In fact, Korax continued, "I think it's time we put Mr. Ryder's skills to the test in a real mission. I have a contract that requires a small, elite team for an infiltration job. High risk, but even higher reward. I want you two to lead it." Zara's eyes widened in surprise. A mission alone with Jack. The thought filled her with a mix of dread and anticipation, but she knew better than to refuse a direct order from Korax. "As you command, General," she said, inclining her head respectfully. Jack, for his part, looked positively thrilled at the prospect. "Sounds like fun," he said, rubbing his hands together eagerly. "When do we start?" As Korax outlined the details of the mission, Zara found herself stealing glances at Jack, trying to gauge his reaction. The human seemed utterly focused, his brow furrowed in concentration as he absorbed the intel. For a moment, Zara found herself admiring his dedication, the way he threw himself wholeheartedly into whatever task was at hand. But she quickly pushed those thoughts aside. She couldn't afford to let herself be distracted by the enigmatic human. Not when there was a mission to be planned and executed. As the briefing concluded, and the crew dispersed to make their preparations, Zara found herself alone with Jack in the armory, checking over their equipment for the upcoming op. "So, Commander," Jack said, breaking the silence. "Just you and me, huh? Should be interesting." Zara shot him a withering glare, but there was no real heat behind it. "Don't get any ideas, human. This is strictly business." Jack chuckled, the sound sending an inexplicable shiver down Zora's spine. "Oh, I wouldn't dream of it, Commander, but you have to admit, we do make a pretty good team." Zora paused in her inspection of a plasma rifle, considering his words. As much as she hated to admit it, he was right. Their skills complemented each other well, and they had a way of pushing each other to new heights. "I suppose we do," she conceded grudgingly. "But don't let it go to your head. I'm still in charge here." Jack gave her a mock salute, his eyes twinkling with mirth. "Aye, aye, Captain." As they finished their preparations and headed for the shuttle bay, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was going to change everything. For better or for worse, she and Jack were about to be thrown into the crucible of combat together, forced to rely on each other for survival. And deep down, in a part of herself she barely recognized, Zara found herself looking forward to the challenge. The risky mission. The shuttle ride to the target was tense and silent, the only sound the hum of the engines and the occasional beep of the navigational instruments. Zara sat in the pilot's seat, her hands steady on the controls, while Jack lounged in the co-pilot's chair, his feet propped up on the dashboard. As they neared their destination, a massive space station orbiting a distant moon, Zora brought up the mission briefing on the main view screen. "All right, listen up," she said, her voice crisp and businesslike. "Our target is a high-security data vault located in the heart of the station. We're after a set of encrypted files, codename Prometheus. The files are heavily guarded, both by physical security and advanced cyber defenses. It's not going to be easy to get in and out undetected." Jack leaned forward, studying the schematics of the station with a critical eye. "What's our infiltration point?" he asked. Zara zoomed in on a section of the station's outer hull. "There's a maintenance airlock here, near the waste processing facilities. It's not heavily monitored, but we'll need to bypass the security lockouts to gain entry." Jack nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. "I can handle that. Once we're inside, we'll need to make our way to the data vault without tripping any alarms. That means avoiding patrols, disabling security cameras, and slicing through any locked doors we encounter." Zara felt a grudging sense of respect for the human's tactical acumen. As much as she hated to admit it, he was good at this sort of thing. "Once we reach the vault," she continued, "I'll hack into the mainframe and download the files while you watch my back. Then we'll exfiltrate the same way we came in and rendezvous with the shuttle for extraction." Jack grinned, the thrill of the impending mission lighting up his eyes. "Sounds like a cakewalk." Zara shot him a stern look. "Don't get cocky, Ryder. This is a high-stakes operation. One slip-up, and we'll have the entire station's security force down on our heads." Jack held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Relax, Commander. I've got this. Trust me." Zara bit back a retort. Trust was not something that came easily to her, especially when it came to unpredictable humans. But like it or not, she was going to have to rely on Jack for this mission. As the shuttle docked with the airlock, and they prepared to disembark, Zara felt a strange sense of anticipation mixed with trepidation. This was the moment of truth, the point of no return. With a hiss of releasing pressure, the airlock doors slid open, revealing a dimly lit maintenance corridor beyond. Jack and Zara exchanged a nod, their faces set with grim determination, and stepped out into the unknown. The first part of the infiltration went smoothly, with Jack making short work of the airlock's security lockouts. They moved swiftly and silently through the station's maintenance tunnels, avoiding the occasional patrol of security drones. But as they neared the data vault, They encountered their first real obstacle, a sealed bulkhead door, heavily reinforced and guarded by a pair of armed sentries. Jack and Zara ducked into a side passage, their backs pressed against the cold metal wall, as they discussed their options in hushed whispers. "I can take out the guards," Zara said, her hand resting on the hilt of her plasma blade. "But that door looks like it's going to be a problem. It's too thick to cut through without setting off every alarm in the station." Jack frowned, his mind racing. Then his eyes lit up with a sudden idea. "The waste processing system," he said. "If we can access the main control panel, I might be able to trigger a malfunction that will draw the guards away from the door." Zara raised an eyebrow, impressed in spite of herself. "That's actually not a bad idea. How did you come up with that?" Jack shrugged, a mischievous grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Let's just say I've had some experience with creating diversions. You don't grow up on the streets of a frontier colony without learning a few tricks." Zara felt a flicker of curiosity about Jack's past, but she pushed it aside. There would be time for questions later, assuming they survived this mission. "All right," she said, "let's do it. I'll keep watch while you work on that control panel." Jack nodded and slipped away, moving with surprising stealth for someone of his size. Zara watched him go, feeling an unfamiliar sense of unease. She wasn't used to relying on someone else, especially not a human. But like it or not, Jack was her partner on this mission, and she needed to trust him. Minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness as Zara waited, her senses hyper-alert for any sign of trouble. Then, with a sudden blare of alarms and flashing red lights, all hell broke loose. The waste processing system had gone haywire, spewing noxious fluids and gases into the surrounding corridors. The guards abandoned their post at the door, rushing off to deal with the crisis. Seizing their chance, Zara and Jack sprinted for the now unguarded door. Zara made short work of the locking mechanism with her hacking tools, and they slipped inside just as the station's security response teams arrived on the scene. The data vault was a cavernous chamber, filled with rows upon rows of humming servers and blinking status lights. In the center of the room stood a large holographic display, the entry point for the mainframe's cyber defenses. Zara approached the display, her fingers flying over the glowing interface as she worked to breach the system's firewalls. Jack took up a position near the door, his plasma rifle at the ready, eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. For several tense minutes, the only sound was the furious tapping of Zara's claws on the holographic keys and the distant wail of alarms. Then, with a triumphant hiss, Zara stepped back from the display. "I'm in," she said, her voice tight with concentration. "Beginning data transfer now." A progress bar appeared on the display, slowly ticking upwards as the precious files were downloaded into Zara's data storage device. Jack watched the door, his trigger finger twitching with nervous energy. They were so close now, the end of the mission in sight. But Zara knew better than to let her guard down. In her experience, this was often when things went wrong. As if on cue, the door to the data vault suddenly shuddered under a heavy impact. Jack and Zara exchanged a tense glance. The station's security forces had found them. "How much longer?" Jack asked, his voice strained. Zara glanced at the progress bar. 90%. Just a few more seconds. Another impact rocked the door, the metal starting to buckle under the assault. Jack readied his rifle, preparing for a fight. With a final beep, the progress bar hit 100%. Zara yanked the data storage device free, stuffing it into a pouch on her belt. "Got it," she yelled. "Let's go." They sprinted for the door, Jack laying down a barrage of covering fire as the security forces breached the room. Plasma bolts streaked past them, sizzling against the metal walls. Zara led the way, her mind racing as she tried to plot the fastest route back to their shuttle. They'd memorized the station's layout, but the chaos of the mission had thrown everything into disarray. As they rounded a corner, they found themselves face to face with a squad of heavily armed security drones. Jack and Zara dove for cover, plasma bolts filling the air around them. "We're cut off," Jack shouted over the din of battle. "We need a new plan." Zara gritted her teeth, her mind working furiously. Then she spotted a maintenance hatch on the wall nearby, leading into a network of service tunnels. "There," she yelled, pointing. "We can use the tunnels to bypass the security forces and get back to the shuttle." Jack nodded, laying down another burst of suppressing fire as Zara wrenched open the hatch. They dove through, sealing it behind them, just as the drones opened up with a fresh volley. The service tunnels were narrow and dimly lit, the air thick with the stench of oil and ozone. Zara took the lead, her helmet's built-in mapping system guiding them through the labyrinthine passages. As they ran, Zara found herself marveling at how smoothly she and Jack worked together. Despite their differences and initial mistrust, they had fallen into an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's moves and covering each other's blind spots. It was almost as if they were meant to be partners, two halves of a greater whole. The thought sent a strange thrill through Zara, even as she tried to dismiss it as a foolish notion. After what felt like an eternity of twists and turns, they finally emerged into the shuttle bay, their ride home waiting for them. But as they sprinted towards the shuttle, a sudden explosion rocked the bay, sending them tumbling to the ground. A massive security mech, bristling with weapons and armor, had emerged from a hidden alcove, its sights set on the fleeing intruders. Jack and Zara scrambled to their feet, plasma fire pinging off their shields as they dove for the cover of the shuttle's landing gear. They were so close, the hatch just a few tantalizing meters away. But the mech was relentless, its heavy cannons hammering away at their position. "I'll draw its fire," Jack yelled over the cacophony. "You get to the shuttle and warm up the engines." Before Zara could protest, Jack was moving, darting out from behind the landing gear and sprinting across the bay, his rifle spitting plasma bolts at the mech. The machine swiveled to track him, its cannons roaring. Seizing her chance, Zara dashed for the shuttle, her heart pounding in her ears. She could hear the sounds of battle behind her, the sizzle of plasma and the crunch of metal on metal. She reached the hatch and scrambled inside, throwing herself into the pilot's seat and frantically flipping switches and toggles. The engines coughed to life, the shuttle shuddering as it lifted off the deck. Zara swung the craft around, searching desperately for any sign of Jack. For a moment, she feared the worst. But then she saw him, a lone figure sprinting towards the shuttle, the smoldering wreckage of the security mech behind him. With a skill born of years of practice, Zara brought the shuttle in low, the hatch yawning open. Jack leaped aboard, his armor scorched and dented, but his cocky grin still firmly in place. "Cutting it a little close there, Commander," he quipped as the hatch sealed shut behind him. Zara shot him a glare, even as relief flooded through her. "Shut up and strap in," she growled. "We're not out of this yet." As the shuttle rocketed away from the station, alarms blaring and security ships in hot pursuit, Zara felt a sense of exhilaration mixed with something else, something she couldn't quite name. All she knew was that, against all odds, they had done it. They had completed the mission and retrieved the precious data, thanks in no small part to Jack's quick thinking and bravery. As they made the jump to light speed, leaving their pursuers far behind, Zara found herself sneaking a glance at the human beside her. He met her gaze, his blue eyes sparkling with the same adrenaline-fueled high that she felt. For a moment, the rest of the universe fell away, and it was just the two of them, bound together by the shared thrill of victory. And deep down, in a part of herself she scarcely recognized, Zara knew that something had changed between them, something that could never be undone. The mission was over, but their story, it seemed, was just beginning. Earned respect. The return to the Phantom's blade was a triumphant one, with the crew gathering in the hangar bay to welcome back their victorious comrades. As Jack and Zara disembarked from the shuttle, they were met with cheers and applause, the assembled aliens marveling at their success against seemingly impossible odds. But Zara barely registered the accolades, her mind still reeling from the events of the mission. She had seen a side of Jack that she hadn't expected, a depth of courage and resourcefulness that had caught her off guard. And the strange, electric connection that had sparked between them in the heat of battle, that was something she couldn't easily dismiss. As the crew dispersed back to their duties, Zara found herself lingering in the hangar, watching as Jack chatted easily with a group of admirers. He seemed so at ease, so comfortable in his own skin, even among aliens who had once viewed him with suspicion and mistrust. It was a quality that Zara had always envied, that ability to win others over with sheer force of personality. As a commander, she had always relied on strength and discipline to maintain order, but Jack, he made it look effortless. Lost in thought, Zara didn't notice Cracks approaching until the insectoid was right beside her, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "He's something else, isn't he?" Cracks mused, his compound eyes fixed on Jack. "I have to admit, I had my doubts about him at first. But after what you two pulled off today, I'm starting to see what all the fuss is about." Zara grunted noncommittally, not wanting to betray the conflicting emotions swirling within her. "Ease, useful," she allowed grudgingly. "But don't go getting too attached. He's still a wild card, and I don't like wild cards on my ship." Cracks chuckled, a rasping sound that echoed strangely in the cavernous hangar. "You keep telling yourself that, Commander. But I've seen the way you look at him when you think no one's watching. There's more going on there than just professional respect." Zara rounded on her first mate, her eyes flashing dangerously. "Watch yourself, Cracks," she warned. "I won't have anyone questioning my judgment, least of all when it comes to matters of the heart." But even as the words left her mouth, Zara knew they rang hollow. Cracks was right, loath as she was to admit it. There was something about Jack that drew her in, something that went beyond mere admiration for his skills. Cracks held up his clawed hands in a placating gesture. "Easy, Commander. I meant no offense. I'm just saying, maybe it's time to let your guard down a little. The human has proven himself, and the crew has taken a shine to him. Perhaps it's time to start seeing him as more than just an asset." With that, the insectoid turned and scuttled away, leaving Zara alone with her thoughts. She watched as Jack finally extricated himself from his adoring fans and made his way over to her, his step light and his grin wide. "Some mission, huh?" he said, coming to a stop beside her. "I have to say, Commander, you really know how to show a guy a good time." Zara rolled her eyes, but she couldn't quite suppress the twitch of a smile at the corner of her mouth. "Don't get used to it, Ryder. We got lucky this time, but luck has a way of running out when you least expect it." Jack's grin only widened. "Then I guess we'd better make the most of it while we can," he said, his voice dropping to a suggestive purr. Zara felt heat rising in her cheeks, and she quickly looked away, cursing herself for her weakness. This was exactly what she had been afraid of, this attraction that seemed to be growing between them. It was dangerous, a distraction that could get them both killed. But even as she tried to summon her usual icy reserve, Zara found herself wavering. There was something about Jack's easy confidence, his unflappable charm, that made her want to let down her guard, to take a chance on something more than just a working relationship. "Jack," she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I wanted to thank you for what you did back there on the station. You took a big risk, drawing that mech's fire so I could get to the shuttle. You could have been killed." Jack's grin softened into something warmer, more genuine. "Hey, that's what partners do, right? We look out for each other. Besides, I knew you'd have my back. You're too damn good at your job to let a little thing like a killer robot slow you down." Zara felt a flush of pride at the compliment, even as she tried to brush it off. "Yeah, well, don't make a habit of it. I can't always be there to save your ass." Jack chuckled, a deep, rich sound that sent shivers down Zora's spine. "Wouldn't dream of it, Commander. I like my ass too much to risk it unnecessarily." They stood there for a moment, grinning at each other like a pair of idiots, the tension between them so thick you could cut it with a plasma blade. Then, with a cough and a shake of her head, Zara broke the spell. "Right, well, We should probably debrief with the General. He'll want a full report on the mission, and I need to make sure the data we retrieved is secure." Jack nodded, his grin fading into a more serious expression. "Of course, Commander. Lead the way." As they made their way through the ship's corridors, Zara found herself hyper-aware of Jack's presence at her side, the heat of his body, and the faint scent of his sweat and armor. It was distracting, maddening, and yet somehow comforting at the same time. When they reached the briefing room, they found General Korax already waiting for them, his craggy face split in a wide, toothy grin. "Ah, the conquering hero's return," he boomed, his voice filling the small space. "I must say, Commander, when I assigned this mission to you and Mr. Ryder, I had my doubts. But you've proven me wrong, and I couldn't be happier about it." Zara inclined her head, accepting the praise with her usual cool reserve. "Thank you, General, but it was a team effort. We couldn't have done it without the support of the entire crew." Korax waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. A team is only as good as its leaders, and you two have shown that you're a force to be reckoned with, which is why I have another mission for you." Zara and Jack exchanged a glance, their eyebrows raised in surprise. Another mission, so soon after the last one. It was unusual, to say the least. "What kind of mission, sir?" Zara asked, her tone cautious. Korax leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "A big one, Commander. The kind of mission that could change the course of the war and the balance of power in the galaxy. I'm talking about taking down the Zorgax, once and for all." Zara felt her blood run cold. The Zorgax were the most feared and reviled of all the alien races, a species of brutal conquerors who had carved a bloody swath across the stars. They were the bogeymen of the galaxy, the monsters that haunted the nightmares of every sentient being. And now, it seemed, they were to be Zara and Jack's next target. "The Zorgax?" Jack asked, his voice incredulous. "With all due respect, General, that's a tall order. They're not exactly known for their hospitality." Korax chuckled, a grim sound that held no mirth. "No, they're not. But that's why I'm sending my best. The data you retrieved from that station, it contains vital intelligence on the Zorgax's movements and plans. With that information, we have a real chance of striking a blow against them, of weakening their hold on the galaxy." Zara frowned, her mind racing with the implications. A chance to take down the Zorgax was an opportunity too good to pass up. But the risks were immense. They would be going up against the most ruthless and formidable foe they had ever faced, with no guarantee of success or survival. But as she looked at Jack, saw the determination and courage burning in his eyes, Zara felt her resolve hardening. This was what they had been training for, what they had been fighting for all along. A chance to make a real difference, to strike a blow for freedom and justice in a galaxy that had too little of both. "We'll do it," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "We'll take the fight to the Zorgax, and we'll make them rue the day they ever set foot in our corner of the universe." Jack grinned, his hand coming up to rest on her shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. "Damn straight we will. The Zorgax won't know what hit them." As they left the briefing room, their steps filled with purpose and their hearts filled with determination, Zara felt a sense of destiny settling over her. This was what she had been born for, what she had been training for all her life. And with Jack at her side, she knew that nothing in the galaxy could stop them. Unlikely connection. In the days that followed, the Phantom's blade was a hive of activity as the crew prepared for their impending mission against the Zorgax. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Battle plans were drawn up and analyzed, and the ship's systems were fine-tuned for maximum efficiency. Amid the bustle and tension, Zara found herself spending more and more time with Jack. It started as a practical necessity, as they worked together to plan the details of the mission and coordinate with the various members of the crew. But as the hours turned into days, Zara realized that she was beginning to look forward to their meetings for reasons that had little to do with duty or strategy. There was an ease to their conversations now, a comfort and familiarity that had been absent in their early interactions. Where once there had been tension and mistrust, now there was a growing sense of kinship, of shared purpose and understanding. They talked of many things in those stolen moments between the demands of duty, of their pasts, their hopes and dreams for the future. Jack spoke of his childhood on the frontier colonies, of the hardships and the joys of life on the edge of civilization. Zara, in turn, shared stories of her own upbringing, of the rigid discipline and high expectations of her warrior culture. They discovered a common love of adventure, of pushing themselves to the limits of their abilities and beyond. And they found, to their mutual surprise, a deep respect for each other's strengths and skills. For Zara, who had always prided herself on her independence and self-reliance, it was a strange and unsettling feeling to find herself so drawn to another being. She had never allowed herself the luxury of close personal relationships, seeing them as a weakness that could be exploited by her enemies. But with Jack, she found herself letting down her guard in ways she had never thought possible. He had a way of putting her at ease, of making her feel safe and valued in a way that no one else ever had. It wasn't just his combat skills or his quick wit, though those certainly played a part. It was something deeper, something that spoke to a kindred spirit within her. In Jack, she saw a reflection of herself, a warrior bound by duty and honor, but yearning for something more. And so, as the days turned into weeks and the Phantom's blade drew ever closer to its fateful rendezvous with the Zorgax, Zara found herself growing more and more attached to the enigmatic human who had so disrupted her ordered existence. She knew it was dangerous, knew that such attachments could only lead to heartache and distraction in the heat of battle. But try as she might, she could not seem to help herself. Jack had become a part of her life, a part of her very being, and she knew that she would fight to the death to protect him, just as he would for her. It all came to a head one night as they sat together in the ship's observation lounge, gazing out at the stars that streamed past the viewport. They had been discussing the upcoming mission, going over the final details and contingencies, when Jack suddenly fell silent, his eyes distant and thoughtful. "What is it?" Zara asked, concern creasing her brow. "Is something wrong?" Jack shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "No, nothing's wrong. I was just thinking. About us. About how far we've come since that first day in the hangar bay." Zara felt her heart skip a beat at the mention of us, but she tried to keep her voice steady as she replied. "We've certainly been through a lot together. But that's the nature of our work, isn't it? We form bonds under fire, bonds that are stronger than anything else." Jack nodded, but his smile only grew wider. "True enough. But this feels different, somehow. Like it's more than just a bond of battle. Like it's something deeper." Zara swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. She knew what he was saying, knew the unspoken meaning behind his words. And yet, she found herself hesitating, torn between the desire to embrace this newfound connection and the fear of what it might mean. "Jack," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, I don't know what to say. This is all so new to me, so unexpected." He reached out then, his hand finding hers and twining their fingers together. The touch was electric, sending shivers racing up her spine and making her heart pound in her chest. "I know," he said softly, his eyes locked on hers. "It's new for me too. But I can't deny what I'm feeling, Zara. And I don't think you can either." She closed her eyes, let herself savor the warmth of his touch and the depth of emotion in his voice. He was right, of course. She couldn't deny what was happening between them, couldn't pretend that it was just a passing fancy or a momentary weakness. This was real as anything she had ever known. And though it terrified her on some deep, primal level, she knew that she could not turn away from it, could not reject the gift that the universe had seen fit to bestow upon her. "No," she said at last, her eyes opening to meet his once more. "I can't deny it, and I don't want to. But Jack, this won't be easy. We're soldiers, warriors. Our lives are not our own. We could be torn apart at any moment, by duty or death or a dozen other things. He nodded, his expression somber but resolute. I know, but that's all the more reason to seize what happiness we can, while we can. I'm not asking for forever, Zara. I'm just asking for now, for this moment, and for as many moments as we can steal before the universe takes them away from us. She felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, tears of joy and sorrow, and a love so fierce it almost hurt to contain it. And in that moment, she knew that she would give him anything he asked, would follow him to the ends of the universe and beyond. Then you have me, she whispered, leaning in close until their foreheads touched and their breath mingled. For now, and for as long as the fates allow. I am yours, Jack Ryder, and you are mine. Their lips met then, in a kiss that was at once tender and passionate, a promise and a declaration of all that they had become to each other. And as they lost themselves in the sweetness of that embrace, the stars outside the viewport seemed to dance and sing in celebration of their union. Far beyond the walls of the Phantom's blade, the galaxy continued its inexorable march towards war and chaos and darkness. But for Zara and Jack, in that perfect, shining moment, none of it mattered. They had found each other, against all odds and expectations, and though the future was uncertain, and the path ahead fraught with peril, they knew that they would face it together, bound by a love that could overcome any obstacle. And so they held each other close, two hearts beating as one, and let the universe fade away until there was nothing left but the warmth of their embrace and the infinite promise of the stars. The final test. The day of the mission dawned cold and clear, the stars outside the viewport of the Phantom's blade glittering like diamonds against the velvet blackness of space. In the hangar bay, the crew gathered for their final briefing, their faces grim and their eyes sharp with anticipation. Zara stood at the head of the assembly, her posture straight and her expression focused as she outlined the plan of attack. They would be jumping into Zorgak space under cloak, using the intelligence gathered from their previous mission to slip past the enemy's defenses and strike at the heart of their command structure. It was a daring plan, one that carried with it an immense risk of failure and death. But it was also their best chance of dealing a crippling blow to the Zorgak's war machine, of breaking their stranglehold on the galaxy and bringing hope to the countless worlds that suffered under their tyrannical rule. As she spoke, Zora's eyes kept drifting to where Jack stood at the edge of the crowd, his arms folded across his chest and his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. In the days since their confession of love, they had stolen what moments they could to be together, to explore the depths of their newfound connection. But now, as the hour of battle approached, they both knew that duty must take precedence over all else. Their love would have to be put aside, locked away in some secret corner of their hearts until the fighting was done, and the future was theirs to claim. Still, as Zara concluded her briefing and the crew began to disperse to their stations, she couldn't resist the urge to pull Jack aside for one last moment of privacy. She led him into a quiet alcove off the main hangar, her hand finding his and squeezing it tightly. "Jack," she said, her voice low and urgent, "I need you to promise me something." He cocked an eyebrow at her, a hint of his old cocky grin playing at the corners of his mouth. "Anything, Commander. You know that." She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to say. If things go wrong out there, if it looks like we're not going to make it, I need you to promise me that you'll get out, that you'll save yourself, and leave me behind if you have to." Jack's grin faded, replaced by a look of shock and dismay. "What? No way, Zara. I'm not leaving you behind, not for anything. We're in this together, remember." She shook her head, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I know, but you have to understand, Jack. I'm the commander of this ship, the leader of this crew. Their lives are my responsibility, and I can't put my own desires above that. If it comes down to a choice between my life and the success of the mission, I have to choose the mission. Every time. Jack stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. I understand, he said softly. But I'm not making any promises, Zora. If it comes down to it, I'll do what I have to do. And that includes saving your stubborn, self-sacrificing ass if I have to. Despite herself, Zara felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. I suppose I should have expected that, she said wryly. You never were one for following orders. Jack grinned, the tension between them easing just a fraction. Damn straight. I'm a wild card, remember? They stood there for a moment longer, their hands clasped and their eyes locked, saying without words all the things that their hearts were too full to express. Then, with a final squeeze of their fingers, they turned and headed for their stations, ready to face whatever the universe had in store for them. The jump into Zorgak space was a tense and nerve-wracking affair, the crew of the Phantom's Blade working with silent efficiency to maintain their cloak and avoid detection. Zara sat in the command chair, her eyes glued to the readouts, and her mind racing with 1,000 different scenarios and contingencies. Beside her, Jack manned the weapons console, his hands hovering over the controls and his body coiled with the same tightly wound energy that thrummed through the entire ship. They were deep in enemy territory now, surrounded on all sides by the vast and implacable might of the Zorgak's war machine. One false move, one tiny error, and they would be discovered and destroyed before they could even begin their mission. But Zara refused to let herself dwell on that possibility, refused to let fear or doubt cloud her judgment. She had a job to do, and she would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. As they neared their target, a massive Zorgak's command ship bristling with weapons and sensors, Zara felt a cold knot of determination settling in her gut. This was it, the moment of truth, the culmination of all their planning and preparation, all their blood and sweat and tears. With a final, silent prayer to whatever gods might be listening, she gave the order to decloak and open fire. And then all hell broke loose. The Zorgak ship reacted with terrifying speed and precision, its weapon systems locking onto the Phantom's blade and unleashing a barrage of devastating fire. The smaller ship shuddered and bucked under the onslaught, its shields straining to absorb the punishing energy beams and missile strikes. But Jack was ready for them, his fingers flying over the weapons controls as he returned fire with a vengeance. The Phantom's blade might have been outgunned and outmatched, but it had surprise and maneuverability on its side, and Jack used those advantages to their fullest extent. He wove the ship through a dizzying series of evasive maneuvers, ducking and weaving through the enemy fire, even as he rained down a hail of plasma bolts and quantum torpedoes on the Zorgak ship's vulnerable points. Beside him, Zara called out orders and adjustments with cool, focused precision, her mind wholly absorbed in the intricate dance of battle. Together, they made a formidable team, their skills and instincts perfectly complementing each other as they pushed themselves and their ship to the very limits of their capabilities. But even with all their courage and determination, the odds were stacked heavily against them. The Zorgak ship was simply too large, too powerful, its defenses too formidable for the Phantom's blade to overcome on its own. Slowly but surely, the smaller ship began to take damage, its shields failing and its hull buckling under the relentless assault. Zara gritted her teeth as another explosion rocked the bridge, sparks cascading from shattered consoles and acrid smoke filling the air. They were losing, she realized with a sinking feeling of dread. Despite all their efforts, despite the bravery and skill of her crew, they were going to be destroyed. But even as that realization crashed over her like a wave of icy water, she refused to give up hope. She had made a promise to her crew, to the countless worlds counting on them to succeed, and she would not let them down, not while there was still breath in her body and fire in her heart. "Jack," she called out over the din of battle, "we need a miracle. Tell me you've got one up your sleeve." The human glanced over at her, his face streaked with sweat and grime, but his eyes still blazing with that indomitable spirit she had come to love so much. "I might have one idea," he said, his voice strained but determined. "But it's a long shot, and it'll mean putting everything on the line." Zara didn't hesitate. "Do it," she said, her voice ringing with the full force of her authority and her faith in him. "Whatever it takes, Jack. We've come too far to fail now." He nodded, his jaw tightening with resolve. And then, with a final, searing look of love and trust, he turned back to his console and began to put his desperate plan into motion. The next few minutes were a blur of frenzied activity and heart-stopping tension, as Jack worked feverishly to bypass the Zorgak ship's defenses and deliver a crippling blow to its main reactor core. It was a maneuver that required split-second timing and nerves of steel, a high-stakes gamble that could either save them all or doom them to oblivion. But through it all, Zara never doubted him for a moment. She had seen the depth of his courage and the strength of his will, had felt the power of his love and his unwavering commitment to their cause. If anyone could pull off this impossible feat, it was Jack Ryder. And so, as the seconds ticked down, and the enemy fire grew ever more intense, she held fast to her faith in him, to the unbreakable bond that had brought them together and made them stronger than they ever could have been alone. And then, with a final triumphant shout from Jack and a blinding flash of light that filled the viewport, it was over. The Zorgak ship shuddered and convulsed, its reactor core breached, and its power systems failing. Against all odds, against every expectation, they had done it. As the crew of the Phantom's blade erupted into cheers and shouts of joy, Zara felt a wave of exhausted relief washing over her. They had won, had struck a blow against the Zorgaks that would be felt across the galaxy. And they had done it together, as a team, as a family. But even as she basked in the glow of their victory, she knew that it was only the beginning. The Zorgaks would not take this defeat lightly, would redouble their efforts to crush the resistance and maintain their iron grip on the stars. The road ahead would be long and hard, filled with dangers and sacrifices that she could scarcely imagine. But with Jack at her side, with the courage and determination of her crew to guide her, Zara knew that they would face whatever challenges lay ahead with unwavering resolve. For they were the guardians of the galaxy, the defenders of the weak and the oppressed, and they would never rest until the Zorgaks were defeated and the universe was safe once more. An unbreakable bond. In the aftermath of their stunning victory against the Zorgak's command ship, the crew of the Phantom's blade found themselves the toast of the galaxy. News of their daring raid spread like wildfire, igniting a spark of hope in the hearts of countless beings who had long suffered under the oppressive rule of the alien conquerors. Everywhere they went, Zara and her crew were greeted as heroes, as the saviors who had struck the first blow in what many now believed would be the final war against the Zorgaks. Medals were awarded, parades were held, and the name of the Phantom's blade became a rallying cry for all those who yearned for freedom and justice. But amidst all the celebration and adulation, Zara found herself drawn ever closer to Jack, the man who had stood beside her through every trial and tribulation, who had risked everything to be with her, and to fight for the cause they both believed in. In the quiet moments between the endless rounds of briefings and strategy sessions, they stole away to be alone, to revel in the simple joy of each other's company. They talked of their hopes and dreams, of the future they longed to build together once the war was won. And though the road ahead was still long and fraught with peril, Zara knew that with Jack at her side, there was nothing they could not overcome. He was her rock, her anchor, the one constant in a universe that seemed to shift and change with every passing moment. Even in the heat of battle, when the odds seemed insurmountable and the enemy pressed in on all sides, she drew strength from his presence, from the knowledge that he would always be there to watch her back and to fight alongside her to the bitter end. Together, they were an unstoppable force, a team forged in the crucible of war and tempered by the unbreakable bonds of love and loyalty. And as the conflict with the Zorgaks reached its final desperate stages, they proved themselves time and again to be the galaxy's greatest champions. Through countless battles and skirmishes, through setbacks and triumphs, They led the charge against the alien menace, rallying the scattered forces of the resistance into a cohesive fighting force that struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. And when at last the final battle came, when the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance and all seemed lost, it was Zora and Jack who stood at the forefront of the fray, their weapons blazing and their spirits unbroken. In that moment, as they faced down the massed ranks of the Zorgak's war machine, Zara felt a sense of clarity and purpose that she had never known before. This was what she had been born for, what she had trained and fought and bled for all her life. And with Jack beside her, his love and his courage fueling her own, she knew that there was no force in the universe that could stop them. In the end, it was not superior firepower or advanced technology that won the day, but the indomitable will and unbreakable spirit of two warriors who had found in each other the strength to overcome any obstacle. Against all odds, against every expectation, they emerged victorious. The Zorgaks broken and scattered before them, their hold on the galaxy shattered forever. As the smoke cleared and the dust settled, Zara found herself standing on the bridge of the Phantom's Blade, her crew arrayed before her in triumphant celebration. And at the center of it all, his eyes shining with pride and love, stood Jack. In that moment, as she gazed upon the man who had changed her life in ways she had never dreamed possible, Zara felt a rush of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. Gratitude, joy, and a love so fierce and so pure that it took her breath away. Without a word, she stepped forward and took his hand in hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that spoke volumes. And as the crew erupted in cheers and applause around them, she leaned in close, her forehead touching his, and whispered the words that had been burning in her heart since the moment they first met. "I love you, Jack Ryder, with every fiber of my being, with every beat of my heart. You are my partner, my equal, my soulmate, and I will stand beside you, now and forever, come what may." Jack's eyes glistened with unused tears as he tightened his grip on her hand, his voice rough with emotion as he replied, "And I love you, Zara Vex, more than life itself, more than anything in this universe or any other. You are my commander, my guiding star, the one who makes me whole. And I will follow you to the ends of the cosmos, through every trial and every triumph, until the stars themselves burn out and fade away." In the days and weeks that followed, as the galaxy slowly began to heal from the scars of war, Zara and Jack remained at the forefront of the rebuilding efforts. They worked tirelessly to bring aid and comfort to the countless worlds ravaged by the Zorgaks, to forge new alliances and new hope in the aftermath of the conflict. And through it all, their love only grew stronger, their bond more unbreakable with each passing day. They were a shining example to all who knew them, a symbol of the power of unity and compassion in the face of even the darkest adversity. In time, the Phantom's Blade became more than just a ship, more than just a home for the intrepid crew who had fought so bravely to defend the galaxy. It became a legend, a symbol of hope and resilience that would endure long after its creators had passed into the annals of history. And at the heart of that legend, forever entwined in the fabric of the universe itself, were two names that would never be forgotten: Zara Vex and Jack Ryder, the warriors who had defied the odds, who had fought and loved and triumphed against all expectation. Their story would be told in song and verse, in the whispered tales of children, and the soaring epics of bards. And though the details might change with each retelling, the core of their legacy would remain forever unchanged. For theirs was a love that had tamed the fiercest of hearts, a bond that had brought light to the darkest of times. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. As Zara stood on the observation deck of the Phantom's Blade, gazing out at the stars that had been their constant companions through so many trials and triumphs, she felt a profound sense of peace and contentment settling over her. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that there would always be new challenges and new dangers to face. But with Jack at her side, with the love and loyalty of her crew to guide her, she knew that there was nothing they could not overcome. For they were the guardians of the galaxy, the defenders of the weak and the innocent. And they would never rest until the universe was safe, until every being could live in freedom and harmony under the shining light of the stars. With a smile on her lips and a fire in her heart, Zara turned to face the future, ready to embrace whatever wonders and adventures lay ahead. For she knew that no matter what the universe might throw their way, they would face it together, always and forever, bound by a love that could never be broken. And so, hand in hand, heart to heart, Zara and Jack stepped forward into the unknown, ready to write the next chapter in a story that would echo through the ages, a legacy that would endure long after the stars themselves had faded into memory.